Good afternoon, Beit Midrash. Welcome back. Hope everybody's doing well. Hope everybody's having a good week and everybody's feeling good. Nice to have you all here and nice to be learning together with you today. And those who are watching this video after the fact, enjoy the conversation, whatever it may be. I'm living it, so I don't know what it's going to be yet. So it'll be fun. It'll be an experience for all of us. Welcome. We're going to go ahead and continue. Welcome as well as the Beit Midrash. Welcome to the last book of the Torah, to Parshat Devarim. We're all going to miss Rabbi Sacks in a few weeks. Only 10 more chapters that we got in this to learn this together. So, welcome to Parshat Devarim, the first parsha of the last book. So, the effective critic, as he titles it. So, before we jump in, any thoughts, comments, reaction, questions, ponderings?
I just have one question. Sacks writes that it's important for the people to know that their leaders supported them, and that Moses prayed to God each time that they took a misstep. And I really didn't know that prior to reading this chapter. Is that something that is in the Torah and I've missed, or is he just making that assumption?
You talking about his lesson at the end?
Right. That
I think he is. That's his drash, right? That's what he's teaching. I think his point is more of a leadership point.
Okay.
I think that's the main point. He's recommending something in terms of leadership and how a leader should act vis-a-vis his or her followers or those that he or she's leading. What can we learn from Moses about this? I will add, I snickered a little bit as I was reading this. I never actually texted her. So we had to jointly teach a class as part of one of our last classes in rabbinical school, and a friend of mine co-taught the very midrash that he's citing from the Talmud. And I'm like, oh, it's lovely to see that. And I think we came up with pretty much essentially the same conclusion. So that made me feel good too. But other comments before we go?
Diane, are you, is it the word prayer that was tripping you up? Like that when it said that he prayed about it? Because there are a lot of places where we know that he said, hey, leave these people alone, or please forgive them.
Did the people know that he did that? We know that Moses argued with God, but did the people know how angry God was and that Moses was stepping in for them? Did they literally witness it, or did Moses tell them, hey, God's really ticked with you, I've been standing up for you? I mean, where do we get that the people knew it? Like when your kids run to their dad, right? And he says, hey, mom doesn't like this and I got to stand with her. You can't do it. Or mom's wrong, but it's her rule, whatever. How do we know that? How did the people know that?
So, let's see where. I do think he came down from Mount Sinai with the knowledge and criticizes them of what they did was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Whether or not they know, there has to be some of this might be inferring from the context that they know that Moses went back up and nothing really happened after that, right? Like, they weren't further punished beyond the punishments that 2,000 of them slaughtered and the calf slaughtered, and they had to drink the dust of the calf and etc. Nothing else happened beyond that. So there might be he might be inferring to some extent that the Israelites knew that Moses must have interceded on their behalf. And I do think after the spies, he also comes back and says, I'd have to double check again the exact text, see if I can find it quickly while we're talking. But I do believe he comes back and says, because of this, you're not going to enter the Holy Land. But at the same time, they're not getting wiped out either, which means that Moses again had to have interceded on this on their behalf. Let me see if so God says to Moses and Aaron, I have heeded their muttering of the Israelites against me. I will do just as you have urged me. In this wilderness shall your carcasses drop. Of all of you who were recorded in your various lists, you have muttered against me. Not one shall enter the land except for Caleb and Joshua. So, to some extent, you have to assume that Moses went back and reported the conversation that he had with God along the way.
So, Rabbi, I think this is a parsha that's talking about leadership, as you mentioned, but for some reason, it also just harkened back to me to the times that we were in like junior high, middle school, high school, and many times you're not in all the AP classes, you're not the big athlete, you're not big on the social scene. I mean, you may just be in those terms an average student, but when you follow the average students, and I might say especially the Jewish students, the average students on through their career, I mean the rest of their education into their career, many of them become these outstanding, accomplished people. So for me, it was like if you're going to teach your children to be open-minded about those your classmates that may not be able to do the things that you can do, but the likelihood is many of them will turn out to be very accomplished people and outstanding people. For some reason, that also came to mind as I was reading this parsha this week. What do you think?
I mean, yes, there are people. I was having this conversation with a couple people last night where sometimes it's not the people you expect who end up in the positions that they end up in. I've said it before. If you were to go back in time to when I was in religious school and tell any of my religious school teachers that I was going to grow up and lead and be a rabbi leading a congregation, they probably would have laughed in your face. I mentioned the story recently too. Like I'm pretty sure the cantor I had in my synagogue growing up kind of gave up on teaching me bar mitzvah, like Torah trope. Like he's like, you're not going to get it. It's fine. Just you're going to do your best, and whatever happens is going to happen. And I'm just not going to fight you to keep trying to get it right. And here I am. So sometimes it comes in the unexpected places. Sometimes it's expected. There are friends I had growing up in high school and in middle school and in college who, you kind of knew they were going to be awesome at what they did, and they're awesome at what they're doing. But sometimes it surprises you where people end up. Now, to Rabbi Sacks's point, I think there is a level at which, even if you're in a not as much of a leadership position, there is practical advice here as well. That you can't just criticize people for the sake of criticizing people. If you want them to actually listen to you, you have to be ready to protect and defend them at the same time. And you have to be willing to see the good in them and not just point out all the bad things that they're doing. Yes, Dr. Brandy.
No, BB.
BB.
What I think it's also that Sacks is also telling us is how to choose a leader. Choose a leader that is going to behave this way. Choose a leader that is going to defend you. Now, we don't get to choose our parents, but on the other hand, your parents might criticize you. Do this, make your bed, do that, do the other, but let somebody else in the community criticize you. You want to know that your parent is going to be defending you. And I would see this as a person dealing with students, that sometimes the mom would come and complain about how I had treated the student, etc. But my kids had a different perspective. They certainly understood that if the teacher said something about them, it was likely going to come down that the teacher was right and they were wrong. And I mean, of course, now I'm defending my kids. They're perfect in every way and tall and handsome and dark, everything. But that's how you choose your leader. You want your leader to defend you. You want your leader to care for you. You want the leader to want the best for you, not for themselves. And I think Moses is a classic example of that. So when we're looking at who's going to be the rabbi, no, we're looking at who's going to be a political leader and anything. Sacks is telling us what to look for. He's giving us the recipe.
Yes. I think very well said about parents. I was thinking that as well, that parents is in some way a leadership position as well, but as students. But, I think back of some of particularly in high school, I think of some of my favorite teachers. Yeah, they were ready to call me out when I wasn't doing my best, but I knew that they really cared about me also. And I knew that they would back me up if I knew that they cared about me and it was coming from a place that they cared about. And that's the ultimate point, is if you criticize without caring, why should anybody listen to you? Mm-hmm. I think that's Rabbi Sacks's ultimate point, is you got to care about the person and you have to be ready to defend them when needed, but you get that. But only when you show that you care and are ready to defend them can you also then talk about and criticize them also. Yes, Barbara. Yeah.
I also thought of parenting a lot hearing this. And I think to Barbara's point, as far as defending your child to the teacher, I don't think this is talking about defending at any cost, like they're right and you're wrong.
Many times you don't. No.
And some parents do that, and that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about maybe telling mitigating circumstances that the teacher may not know about, but in the end, the loving thing is to tell your child they're wrong and why the teacher, why they need to listen to the teacher or whatever. So, but I do love this idea of seeing the good as well as the bad and trying to be positive. I think that's so important.
I think I agree with you in principle. I think I agree with what you're saying. And I'm not sure the Midrash he's citing actually goes to that point. Like, what happens in the Midrash that Rabbi Sacks cites from the Talmud at the beginning of the chapter? It's top of
The
246.
Yeah, the gold.
Well, it's about the gold and the child that sins because the
Right.
parent put them in the wrong position.
So what's Moses saying to God?
You gave him the gold and you put him in that position. What did you think? Well, they don't need gold in the desert,
You
right?
gave them gold. What did you think they were going to do with this?
Right.
They just spent 400 years in Egypt, and you give, as slaves, you give them all this money. What did you expect from them?
So Rabbi, you should teach a parenting class, because I think that's really the key to parenting is, be careful about what you do, what examples you set and what you give them, because if you want to go from A to Z, you can't get there by doing all F's. You've got to take those steps. So I was the opposite parent. And when my oldest was at the day school, I went in for a conference and the teacher said, I don't know what you're doing to your kid, but I will tell you, he gets more upset when he thinks he's going to get in trouble than the other boys in the class get when they get into trouble. And I said, well, I thought it through pretty clearly. And his punishment would be, if he got in trouble at school, he would have to miss ball practice. So he was then being humiliated in front of his peers, and that was the worst punishment ever. He didn't want to have to miss whatever,
Yeah,
soccer or basketball.
Rabbis have very strong feelings against publicly embarrassing.
Well, it works with a youngster who,
Yeah. It's
takes,
effective, but yes.
yeah. No wonder he's still angry with me, right?
No, but that wasn't an accusation against you. It was just
No, you're the
but,
mom. You got to figure out what works.
Yeah, look, I think there's two parts to this. I think all of us, when we became parents, had a vision and knew generally what we wanted to do, right? Like we want to, we want to be loving, we want to be kind, we want to be patient, we're not going to yell at them, we're going to be generous but not too generous, we're going to be lenient sometimes but not all the time, we need to be some strict, we need to put up some boundaries but not too many boundaries. We kind of had this vision, which when you're in the thick of it doesn't always happen. You have I think a lot of us know, if we were to sit in a parenting class, I think a lot of us would be like, yeah, the basics we know the basics. And I think even when we became we're holding our first babies, we knew the basics. It's just doing it in the heat of a moment that's a lot harder to do.
What I've always said is that, when you have your first baby, you don't know anything about parenting. You haven't been a parent. And then maybe you'll have more kids. But by the time you really get good at parenting, your kids are out of the house. So that's sort of the flip side of what you're saying, I think, Rabbi.
Yes. My wife my wife has a joke that everybody says, do you want to have a baby? It's like, of course, babies are adorable, they're cute, they're snuggly. Nobody asks you if you want to have a teenager. And we love our teenager, don't get me wrong. But that's the natural progression, right? Like they're going to become teenagers eventually. If you do everything right, they're going to become teenagers eventually. But nobody asks you if you want to have a teenager. They just ask if you want to have a baby. So that's the trick.
So does this have anything to do with grandparents? I mean, grandparents are now people who have had experience parenting, but how they relate to their children's parenting is an interesting thing. That your children don't want you to intercede in their parenting decisions. So it is sort of an interesting conundrum for grandparents, I think.
What's the old joke about why grandparents and grandchildren get along so well?
Because the parents are are
Because they have a
mutual.
common enemy. Um, actually, I do think, Stuart, that there is some good lessons in Rabbi Sacks here as well about for grandparents, for parents, but also for grandparents as well. That your kids are always going to know you love them, yes. But if you're always siding with your grandchildren and criticizing your children's parenting, are they going to actually hear it if they always feel like they're the subject of the criticism rather than that you're defending them or having their back or showing what they did well, like pointing out the things they did well also. This is good general. More I'm thinking about, the more I'm feeling this is more general advice. That if you're not willing, if you don't step up and defend and back up somebody, then why and how are they going to ever listen to your criticism? And on the flip side, going a little bit to what Barbara Brandy said before, this is good advice for how we're picking our leaders, whether it's your rabbi or whether it's your president or anything. Is, do you feel like they care about you? Not are they willing to listen to you, not what are their policies, but do you actually feel like they care about who you are? Because if they care about you, then they're going to lead you on the right path. But if they don't care, then why would you follow? Yes, Barbara.
Oh, I did find this. I mean, I did start reading the book from the beginning, so I have read more than just the 2 chapters we've talked about in this class with me. But I found this particular one to be, it kind of felt like it was over my head or something. I wasn't quite getting what the point was. And is a summary that there are other times in the Torah where Moses is defending the people, and yet the rabbis take this part where they're having to really kind of draw out that Moses is defending the people as the one to show that. And it's because at that point, the people know Moses cares about them, and that's why it's more important. Or maybe you could give a better synopsis of it.
Well, I think what Rabbi Sacks is saying is tied in a little bit with what he says on 247. Is as we get through this final book of Deuteronomy, Moses is going to be highly critical of the Israelites and is going to be very harsh in what he thinks who he thinks they are, their behavior, and what they're going to do when they get to the land. Like he cites Deuteronomy 31:27. If you have been rebellious against the Lord while I'm alive and with you, how much more you're going to do after I die? Like, you've been awful since I've known you for the last 40 years. When I die, you think this is going to get better? You're going to get even worse. Like, Moses is not holding back in this final speech. But what I think Rabbi Sacks is trying to point out is he's earned the right to do that because he was willing to stand up for the Israelites even when they were wrong. And 2 of the most critical transgressions that they committed, the golden calf and the spies, he stood up for them. And if you stand up for someone, then you earn the right. I should say, if you stand up for someone with compassion, with care, with love, as Moses did, then you earn the right to be able to give them critiques and criticism after. If you're not going to do that, then the criticism is going to fall on deaf ears. And why should anybody listen to you if you're not going to defend them also? But Moses earned the right to be able to criticize them because he loved them and he cared for them. He wanted what was best for them, and he demonstrated that over and over. Other thoughts, comments? Yes.
One thing that impressed me here is the name Devarim, which I'm taking to mean words. Maybe it means something else too, but words. And I've always been paying attention to the idea that Moses said, no, don't make me leader. People aren't going to listen to me. I have a speech defect. And yet here he is. He's got so much to say. So did Moses learn through this that it didn't matter, that his word would successfully communicate? Do we know that? Or is it just, hindsight is 20/20 after the fact? We can see that.
Is your question is your question about Moses's criticism in Deuteronomy, or is it about him speaking up before Deuteronomy?
It's about Moses' self-realization that, hey, I'm able to communicate even though I have a speech defect. I have things to say. And so it's realization that, hey, it didn't matter that he has a speech defect. Because back wherever, that was a big deal.
I gave this sermon the last year, 2 years ago. I gave this sermon at some point where there's a great midrash, I think it's in Tanchuma, in which the Israelites look at Moses and say, I'm sorry, weren't you the one who said that I have a speech defect and don't send me to Pharaoh, and now you won't shut up? Like you're going to spend 30 chapters talking, and you're the one who said I can't talk, I have a speech defect. So the question is, what changed? And the way I view it, Moses found his mission. Moses found what was really important to him and what he was really passionate about and what he felt his life gave his life meaning. When you don't have that, then there's not much you don't have much to say. If you put me into a surgery room, I'm not going to have a whole lot to say because that's not my passion and I don't know that much about it, and it's not all that. That's not who I am. You put me in the Zoom call, I don't shut up like Moses. The same thing, Barbara. I think, if I was to put you into a AI or philosophy of artificial intelligence class, you might have some struggles with it. You might have some opinions, but you're not going to be super talkative. But if I were to ask you about geology, I know that you're going to have a lot to say. And that's fine. But I think part of what that teaches us is we need to find that. I think we need to find that mission, that passion for us in our lives that gives our lives the meaning to be able to act like Moses and be passionate like Moses about it. And there's a certain fear that goes along with that as well. he doesn't want to do it because he's scared of what it might mean. And if we are afraid of what might happen, always, we might miss out on the things that we are actually the most passionate about.
Mhm. But I wonder if it also teaches us that you can rise above a certain disability, whatever your issue is. And maybe it is finding the thing that you can do, finding the thing that you can succeed at. But I think it's an example of moving beyond a difficulty.
Yes.
So, I don't know how many, have you, any of you heard of Rabbi Elliot Cosgrove? Nobody? Barbara. So Rabbi Elliot Cosgrove, and Rabbi, I'm sure you have, right? He is a rabbi at Park Avenue Synagogue in New York, and he has a pretty huge following. And I watched him during COVID, and he spoke about the fact that as a child he had a speech impediment, and but he had a lot to say. He overcame it, and now people really listen to him. And as we're talking about this, he could have just become a writer. He didn't have to get up in front of people and speak, but he is an excellent speaker, and he, as I said, he has a huge following. During COVID, when you would watch on a Saturday morning, there would be thousands of people on that Zoom. So there are people certainly
Yes.
who
Look,
overcome.
so the one caveat I want to put here is, yes, you can overcome a lot of your limitations if you are convinced enough about your passion for it. Sometimes you're going to have to adapt what you're doing in order to do it. And the example that always comes to my mind, because I find it so powerful, is Rabbi Brad Artson, for those who don't know, has twin children. One, as he says, is neurotypical, and one is is autism spectrum disorder, and has needed a lot of care and help for years to get through high school and throughout his education. And he does talk some. He can't. My recollection, it's been 10 years, but my recollection is he can't really hold a lengthy conversation. But if you were to Google Jacob Artson, man, can that guy write. And one of the most powerful moments I remember is there was a Friday night service that I was at, that he was at also, and the rabbi was talking about teachers and, what was an impactful teacher for you. And Jacob raised his hand, and she said, and the rabbi called on him, and his mom, Alana Artson, held up a laminated keyboard, like a piece of paper, like a keyboard, like a computer keyboard laminated. And Jacob did this. And his mom essentially translated what he was typing, or air typing, because it was Shabbat. And he said, when I was 3 years old, I couldn't talk. And I had a preschool teacher who bent down and said to me, I know you're in there, and I will do everything I can to help you get out. He would never have been able to communicate that with his mouth. So, I want to say, yes, we can overcome some of the obstacles. Moses can overcome with his passion, being heavy-tongued. sometimes we might have to find a different path towards overcoming our obstacles that we might not consider right away. Because we might need to adapt, and we're not going to overcome every obstacle. We might have to adapt around it. But still, if we're passionate enough about what we're doing, and if it's important enough to us, and if it gives our life meaning and feeds our souls, we'll find a way to do it, even if we can't do it the normal way. Other comments, thoughts, questions?
I don't know much about Rabbi Levi Yitzhak of Berdichev, but I love that story.
My favorite Hasidic Rebbe.
Oh, okay. So somebody
probably my
looking
favorite.
up.
He's definitely in my top 3 favorite Hasidic Rebbe's. Yeah, it's an awesome story about him, isn't it? On page 248. There's a variety of these kinds of stories about him. And does it say here? He is known as one of the great defenders of Israel. And those who did some of the Hasidic Parshat Shavua with me last year might remember that, every Hasidic Rebbe kind of has their own flavor. They kind of have their own little focus that they focus on. So the Meore 9, for example, from Chernobyl, really does a lot on knowledge and awareness, and what are we aware of and what are we not aware of. Nachman of Breslov is very much focused on the inner struggles that we do and finding light in darkness. The Mei Hashiloach writes a lot about doubt and how do we overcome doubt. Reb Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev is really about loving other Jews. That's really his focus in his thing, is how do we love and demonstrate love for our fellow Jews around, and known as the great defender of the Jewish people. So, a lot of the stories revolve around him defending the Jewish people to God, much as Moses is doing here. Because he had this great love for them, he's the one who could stand up and love or defend them. Sorry.
So do we ever get an answer to the question of why did God tell them to carry the silver and the gold into the desert where they had no use for it?
Well, they did have a use for it.
I mean, they made a golden calf, but
what else did they do with it?
Oh, well, they built the Mishkan, but
exactly.
Didn't they have to pay for food and drink when they came through peacefully?
Right.
Community. They needed some capital.
I mean, generally the food and water was provided for them in the wilderness.
Yeah, that's
but they had to build a Mishkan.
Yeah, I know, but I just read in this parsha that the instructions to pay for whatever you eat and drink from the well from that Moses tells them.
I used to get this question all the time, is where did they get dolphin skins in the middle of the desert, and where did they get all this gold and silver from, and where did they get they took it from the Egyptians. That's part of the Exodus. And well, why would you want to lug all that stuff around? Because God knew they were going to build a Mishkan, so they had to get the materials from somewhere. They brought it with them. So, God had told them to bring all this gold and this, I remember a teacher, Professor Vered Goldfarb. She had a hyphenated last name. I think Goldfarb is one of them. I can't think of the other. Made a pretty convincing argument that the golden calf was not really a rebellion against God, it was rebellion against Moses. And that it was against Moses's leadership. Moses was gone, they needed a leader, so they built a calf to be their leader, absent Moses. But looking at it from this perspective, that God told them to bring the gold to worship, so that they could build a Mishkan to worship God in the wilderness. And what do? They turn it into an idol. Becomes a pretty strong protest against, rebellion against God as well. In that they're taking something that had this holy intention for it and turned it upside down on its head to use it as idol worship.
They didn't know that it was intended to build the Mishkan when they built the idol,
I
correct?
mean, they hadn't quite gotten commanded to do it yet. But so no, it does not seem they knew what it was there for yet. But and all the more so Moses's counter argument of, you gave them all this gold, what do you want them to do with it? Like, you didn't tell them why they had it. You just told them to bring it. What did you expect they were going to do? Just hang on to it for God knows how long? Like, you got to take some responsibility for this too. Stuart, were you going to say something?
Well, I was just trying to think whether, was it a high percentage of the Jews who were at the base of Mount Sinai, was it a high percentage of them who wanted to build the golden calf, who wanted to contribute the gold or could it have been a minority of them?
So, if I recall correctly, let me see if I can find it again. I think I didn't put my Chumash away yet. If I remember correctly, it was about 2,000, which is a pretty small number, right, considering the Torah kind of says that there were 600,000 who left Egypt, 600,000 plus. I don't remember the exact number. So 2,000 out of that is a pretty small minority.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as a leader, in general, I think your role is not to get the people, your followers, not to get them to love you, but more respect you in that sense. And so if it was only 2,000 out of 600,000, he probably still had a lot of support. Moses did from the people, but even a small minority can upset the apple cart.
Yeah. Trying to find the numbers, but it's not finding it quickly.
Yeah,
but
well, that's what I thought it was, something like that anyway.
But the flip side of that also is, let's say my recollection is right, and it was only 2,000 of the people, 2,000 of the men. Women did, according to tradition, the women did not participate in this. 2,000 out of 600,000 would have been guilty, and 3,000. Sorry, 3,000. There it is. Moses stood at the gate and said, "Whoever is for the Lord, come here. Thus says the Lord, each of you put sword on thigh, go back and forth from gate to gate throughout the camp, and slaughter those who participate." It seems to imply those who participated. 3,000 end up getting killed. But okay, 3,000 out of 600,000, and nonetheless, God is still ready to wipe all of them out because of it. So yes, it's a small number and a small minority, but that doesn't lessen the liability of everybody else. Also, according to tradition, the Levites did not participate in the golden calf either. But we have some civil responsibility and allowing major transgressions to happen, even if we didn't participate, still makes us liable for it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking about how we feel about the Polish people who allowed the Holocaust to happen. I mean, we certainly don't think, oh, well, they're innocent. We think they should have helped us. But I can also see in recent times there have been things that I really didn't think were right, but it's not so easy to know how to stop it. So I do have some sympathy for the other 600 or whatever, 590, whatever thousand. It's not so easy to know what to do, even if you don't think it's right.
Doing the right thing can be hard sometimes, yes. It can be hard to, especially it's particularly hard when you're in the minority trying to do the right thing. When you're in the majority, it's a little easier. When everybody else is trying to do it, it's easier. But yes, it's still hard to do the right thing sometimes and to stand up against the bad things also. Nonetheless, we're called to do it. But at the same time, our calls for criticism, our calls for trying to do better still have to come from a place of love and care and kindness. Otherwise, there's no way that people will listen to us. And that's kind of where Rabbi Sacks comes with this, circle back to him again, is yes, it's hard, but we have to still do it out of a place of love and not out of a place of anger or hatred or self-involvement and self-importance. We have to do it out of a place of, I know you can do better than that because I know you and I love you and I care for you and I know you can do better. Other comments, thoughts, questions as we wrap up? Kol hakavod, everybody. Thank you for learning today. Next week we'll move on Parshat V'Etchanan, and look forward to learning together then. So be well, have a good week, everybody, and if I don't see you before then, Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you, Rabbi.